Welcome to part 18 of Griff Ruby's series, Ecclesiology for Sedevacantists, based on Dogmatic Theology, Volume 2, Christ Church, by Msgr G. Van Noort. Continuing where we left off, Scholion 1. Therefore, the individual or monarchial episcopate takes its origin from the apostles. The arguments adduced yield this conclusion also, that the men to whom the pastoral office of the apostles passed were, immediately after the death of the apostles, real bishops, in this sense, that they alone as individuals governed their individual churches, armed with teaching, priestly, and ordinary ruling power. In fact, not one of the authorities cited gives even so much as the slightest hint of a so-called plural or collegiate episcopate. Many of them clearly rule it out. This may be a reference, part of why it's a body instead of a college most of the time, but he's not getting into that terminology here. Moreover, the first traces of a monarchical episcopate are already discernible in the books of the New Testament. Several passages in the Acts of the Apostle favor the view that James, the brother of the Lord, was the bishop of the church at Jerusalem. The pastoral epistles, those of Timothy and Titus, seem to leave little doubt that Timothy exercised the office of bishop at Ephesus and Titus in Crete. The angels of the churches, to whom St. John sends a letter, Revelation or Apocalypse 1, chapters 1 through 3, can hardly be other than the bishops of those churches. Therefore, it is certain that the monarchical episcopate takes its origin from the apostles. Furthermore, if it had not been started by the apostles, it would not be possible to understand how it could have been foisted on all the churches before the middle of the 2nd century, i.e., before the synods were held, and at a time when the primacy of the Roman pontiff made its authority felt quite sparingly. Once the apostolic origin of the monarchical episcopate had been established, it makes little difference whether the apostles put a bishop in charge of each of the newly founded churches right from the beginning, or whether they sometimes place these latter in the care, for the time being, of a college of presbyters, priests of the first, or according to others, the second class, who would rule the faithful as a sort of common council, as delegates of and under the watchful eye of the apostles, until the proper time arrived for bishops to be appointed. And so we can leave to historians and exegetes those questions which concern the precise meaning of the names episcopo and presbyterios in the 1st century documents, as well as questions concerning the primitive organization of the churches while the apostles were still alive. Scholion 2. The same episcopate comes not only from the apostles, but through the apostles from Christ himself. Christ arranged for the church to be governed forever by successors of the apostles. The latter, following out this direction of their master, put individual bishops in charge of each individual church. Now, it is altogether reasonable to believe that they were executing a divine order also when they thus set up monarchical bishops. Certainly, Christ personally and directly founded the church, and so he himself must have determined its essential framework and structure. Above all else, the rank of bishop, setting aside for the moment the question of primacy, belongs to this structure. As a matter of fact, the earliest witnesses assert, at times rather vaguely, at times quite explicitly, that the episcopate, such as they knew it, i.e., the monarchical episcopate, is of divine right. St. Clement of Rome teaches that the apostles, after receiving their instructions, equipped as they were with a perfect foreknowledge, took care to select co-workers and successors for themselves. St. Ignatius Martyr calls the bishop a grace and a commandment of God. Concerning the bishop, together with his priests and deacons, he says that they were appointed in accordance with the wish of Christ. And so he adds elsewhere that, apart from these, no church deserves the name. Now, why would it be impossible for a legitimate church to exist without a bishop, except that it be the fact that Christ himself has ordered the appointment of the bishop and the priests and the deacons? St. Cyprian, after remarking that the church is founded on the bishops, and that every act of the church is governed by these same rulers, adds, since this was therefore established by divine law, I wonder that some, he doesn't finish the quote here, I guess think otherwise. St. Basil, writing to his disciple Chilo, mentions bishops of the churches of God, which is to say bishops appointed by God. Now, in truth, if the church is founded on bishops by the order of Christ himself, and if the Holy Spirit has placed bishops to rule the church of God, Acts 20:28, then it follows that this arrangement is immutable. It is therefore necessary that the Church of Christ be ruled until the end of time by the college of bishops, each of whom rules over one of the many districts of the Church. Scholium 3. What of St. Jerome's remarks? St. Jerome apparently seems to contradict the doctrine we've just set forth when he writes, "The same person is also priest and bishop, and before the time when, under the instigation of the devil, there arose parties in the church." See, that's where parties come from, is from the devil. "The churches were governed by the council of priests, but when each one wanted those baptized by him to belong to him and not to Christ, it was decreed in the whole world that one of the priests should by election be set over the others, that he should have the care of the whole church and suppress the seeds of the schism. Therefore let bishops be apprised that they are superior to priests by custom rather than by a true decree of the Lord." He writes in the same strain elsewhere when defending priests against the encroachment of deacons. These passages are quite difficult, so difficult indeed that some authors think that St. Jerome should not be listened to on this score, since he departs from the common teaching of the ancients. Still, the following remarks may throw some light on the problem. If St. Jerome's words be taken literally, he contradicts even himself, for elsewhere he expressly acknowledges that there has been a distinction between the bishops and priests from the very beginning of the Church. He writes, for example, that the apostles ordained bishops and priests throughout each of the provinces. Therefore, they were even then distinct orders. The bishops were real individual bishops, for the saint rejects as impossible the supposition of several bishops ruling in one place. In addition, he himself testifies that at least some of the churches have had monarchical bishops right from the beginning. Therefore, unless one is willing to grant that the holy doctor contradicted himself, one must give his word a more favorable interpretation. In this whole matter, it must be noted, firstly, that St. Jerome's aim in both the objectionable passages was to extol the office of the priest, and secondly, that quite often he has let his pen run away with him. In view of this, his probable meaning would seem to be the following. At first, bishops and priests were, for all practical purposes, scarcely distinguishable, since they conducted all their affairs in a spirit of fraternal helpfulness. But a later custom gave the bishop considerable preeminence over priests, not only in right, but also in conduct and practice. So, anyway, key thing here also is Jerome's as a source to contradict everybody else is a unique source. I think you can probably find some one mistake made by about every different doctor of the church you can go through. So I wouldn't make anything of that. Go to the next part.